Welcome to MarketPulse Pros and Pioneers. Each week, I talk with industry leaders on both marketing and entrepreneurship and business to find out all about their wins and failures in marketing right now. We'll hear all about successes and wins and what's fallen flat so that you can take that knowledge and implement it. Learn from the best, from the folks who've been there and done it all, as well as people just like you. Thanks for joining us. This is MarketPulse Pros and Pioneers. What makes a great leader? Mark Musselman has built and coached multi-million-dollar businesses, and he's here to talk about the no bullshit leadership lessons that actually drive growth. Mark is a business leader, an entrepreneur, and executive coach with over 30 years of experience in guiding leaders and businesses through transformation. As the founder of MX5 Consulting, Mark helps business owners, entrepreneurs, and C-level executives break through challenges and accelerate growth using his assess, align, accelerate methodology. Having already led two $30 million plus businesses as a CEO, he understands firsthand the struggles of leadership and the need for strategic clarity. And in addition to coaching, Mark co-founded Tula Mexican Grill in Dublin, applying his business acumen to the hospitality industry. With a no BS approach to leadership, Mark's committed to helping leaders just like you take real action, foster trust, and create businesses that don't just grow, but thrive. Mark, as ever, that is a tall bar to live up to, but I'm confident you're going to smash this. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Paul. That's great to be here.
You've been a CEO, an entrepreneur, an executive coach. What was the turning point that made you, first of all, want to get into senior leadership? Because as a kid, not many people come along and decide they want to run a company, right? Like that's not where we start out. How did you end up, first of all, becoming a CEO?
That's a great question. I think what I have reflected on is when I was young, all the way through my primary education, through, what we refer to as high school and then university, I never really was overly excited about anything in particular. It is demonstrated by the fact that I had 5 different majors when I came through university. And so my attention was kind of going from one topic to another. And then almost immediately after I graduated from college and went into the work world, I began to pay attention to this idea of leadership. And it was the first thing really in my life. It kind of lit me on fire. And it was through an experience I had in my first job where I had the opportunity to observe great leadership in, degrees of very unhealthy leadership, that it kind of woke me up to the fact that that role makes all the difference in the world. And, as we can look around just globally, great leadership makes a huge difference in every facet of life. So I just became fascinated with it. And then I poured myself into it. I also happened to have the good fortune of being born into a family that had a family business. I'm one of 5 kids. All 5 of us were in the business. It was about 300 and some employees. And I had sort of a flavor for that role. And, my siblings didn't have as much of that flavor as I did. So I ended up taking over the family business at 30 years old with 300 employees and 30 million in revenue, and knew enough about myself to know that I didn't know all I needed to know to run it. And I hired my first coach in 1999 when I took over that role. And that was like the catalyst. So, and I've never stopped being fascinated with and doing everything I can to learn everything I can about leadership since that moment.
It's funny, so many great leaders that I speak to almost seem to become a great leader in spite of the bad leadership that they experience at a young age in their first jobs and workplaces that they're in. And it kind of, you'd expect it to almost deter people from wanting to become leaders. But I find that the really good leaders see that and they just think, these people don't need to be bad leaders. We're all capable of being a good leader, if not a great one, at least a good leader. There's just so much lack of development for leadership. Do you think that's fair?
Well, I think it's very fair. I mean, I think what I'm surprised by every day, mostly because I live in it and I kind of swim in that water. So it seems to me self-evident. There's a set of skills, and it can be, I think it's more of a learned set of skills than an inherited set of skills. And I'd say, my journey has included thousands of hours of reading and watching content like a show like this, attending seminars, workshops. And I look at it as my leadership toolbox, right? So I would listen to a podcast like this with the hopes that there's something in the conversation that I can add to my toolbox. And so, I think that many people show up and they assume a position, or they have pursued a position of leadership, and then they stop growing, they stop learning, and they assume they have all they need in order to be effective in that role. And most people are under-equipped. Let me put it that way, because there's so many challenges that a leader faces. And obviously the more complex the business organization, the more complex and diverse the challenges. So, you have to be able to have a robust toolbox where a circumstance appears in front of you, and it could just be, but that's a phenomenal skill for a leader. When I'd say the reflex is to move and to do something, just to stop and do nothing and listen and slow down. Those are things that are developed over time, having made many mistakes in my younger version of a leader, when I just rushed into decision-making or judgment or assumption, only to find out that all of what I had assumed was incorrect, and then having to rewind it. So, I could go down the list and we could talk for, a couple hours about all those, unique skills. So partnering with somebody, if you don't already have that, or committing yourself deeply in whatever form works for you to acquire those skills, is essential.
So that leads us on nicely to the first question that I wanted to really delve into in a bit more detail. So you've led, a $30 million business. No doubt you've helped countless leaders as part of your executive coaching, but what's the toughest leadership lesson that you've had to learn personally?
Yeah, I think the toughest leadership lesson that I learned early and that I share often is, I'm going to say this in the sense that, there's an axiom that kind of runs around sometimes. It says, if you take care of the people, the business will take care of itself, which I think can be true. Certainly if you take care of the people, the business has a greater chance of succeeding. I would say the distinction is, as a leader, as a CEO, entrepreneur, you have to have your eyes on both. I say that because when I took that role as CEO of my family's business, we had an amazing culture, and the people in the business, all 300 of them, were loved and cared for greatly. Having that as a background, this idea, if you take care of the people, the business will take care of itself, expose the blind spot, which is you have to take care of the people and you have to take care of the business. It seems self-evident, but sometimes in our case, I think we got a little bit lost in all of that. How that can show up is, that there was so much focus on the welfare and the health and the culture of the business. Some of the basic fundamental needs of the business itself were not as central to our focus as they should have been. So that led my family's business, after 50 years of ownership, after a period of going through bankruptcy back in 2008-9, was also coincidental with some market challenges at that time. If you remember the 2008-9 period, for us, it was a pretty significant recession. And anyway, so I had the unfortunate of unwinding and taking a family business through bankruptcy after 50 years of family ownership. I would say because it wasn't a both, it was, we put too much emphasis and too much focus on that piece. So, that's a very personal story, but it's one that I often share with clients when I come across their tendency to listen to that axiom and then operate out of that same place. So it's probably very unique, but that's my experience with one of the biggest lessons I've ever learned.
I think, thank you very much for sharing that as well, because I can imagine that's quite a tough story to share emotionally as well. But I imagine that you come across quite a lot of people who are predominantly sat on one side of that fence or the other, right? They either care too much about their people or they don't care anywhere near enough about their people. And it's about finding that balance in the middle.
I think that's a great way of saying it. I don't know I mean, I would say, I don't know if there's a way that you could ever care too much about people. It's just that if you're going to spend that amount of time, focused on the welfare and the health, and the work environment that affects people, you also have to be incredibly mindful of all the details that, are behind the complexities of running a successful, profitable, sustainable business. And, and you'd said there might be a lot of pain in there. There used to be, but now I speak about it as a thing openly. I used to be ashamed of all that, but it's a way for me also when I work with business owners. Most business owners, CEOs live with a fear. And the biggest fear is that they might somehow end up heading down that path of losing everything. So having already been down that journey and, come up on the other side, it's interesting because it's a little bit disarming. I'm not the guy who shows up all the time with, oh my goodness, I've only gotten success. We sold our business for, 10 million and I'm a superhero. None of that. So there's an accessibility that's afforded really as a result of that story that I would have never intended or known about. So I don't go out of my way to tell it to create that outcome, but it is disarming. And then people become interested and like, oh, wow, well, I'm facing a set of challenges. They tend to be more open. They tend to be more honest because let's face it, most people who operate in the world of business live in a world of pretense. Many, are trying to look good, avoid looking bad, and they'll pretty much say or do anything to continue what they want others to see them being instead of what's actually going on. So it's been an unintended kind of consequence from the whole experience, but I find it to be really effective in my ability to connect with business owners and CEOs.
I think that, when I align a lot with that challenge around toxic positivity, and I see that a lot on social media. It's, but it pervades into personal lives and conversations as well. People think it's just social media where we're doing that. We don't. We do that in people who are afraid to allow the bumps of the road to be seen by others. They generally do it in their own lives, to their wives, to their partners, to their children, to their friends and families. And it makes me sad when I see that because, I feel like it's a gift that I have an ability to be open and vulnerable with almost anyone. Probably too much sometimes. I overshare.
Yeah.
But, that vulnerability is what allows us to create genuine connections with people. And when you try and remove that and just showcase your success, you've got no common ground with people because we all learn from our mistakes, right?
Absolutely. And I think, thank you for sharing that. And it sounds like, we are kindred spirits in the sense that I approach life the same way. I think we can all sit and have a conversation at length about the challenges that social media has created around, this ability to curate an image. And then unfortunately for lots of people, they compare themselves to that curated image and they only find themselves falling short of, whatever it is that they're imagining they see. And, I have an experience when I was in a roundtable group of CEOs. This is an interesting insight. And I was part of a group that had 14 CEOs that were together for a number of years. As that 2008, 2009, economic adjustment period occurred, globally, there were basically 6 of us in that group of 14 who went into and through bankruptcy. 6 out of 14, most of them small business owners. And not one of those people, including myself, came to the group who had formed a relationship of trust over a number of years being together with their issue. And so what it really revealed to me is this unbelievable commitment that people have as leaders, as business owners, to maintain the facade, right? And to try to hold it all together. And, there's a lot that can be talked about in that, space. And, one of the gifts of all, one-to-one sort of executive coaching is this idea that there's no one else to impress, right? So I tell my clients all the time, let's begin with one premise, that you and I are going to traffic in nothing but the ground truth. If we start there, then a lot can be accomplished. If you want to continue trafficking, in the world of make-believe, very little is going to, materialize out of this relationship. So it's a ground kind of a rule that I use with like, let's just have a conversation where you're not trying to impress anybody. You're not trying to avoid any facts, and we can get into the real issue that you or issues you're confronting. And if we can do that, chances of you getting where you want to go are exponentially improved.
Special shout out in today's episode for our charity partners, ADHD Liberty, led by Sarah Templeton, who are part of the fight to prevent the school to prison pipeline for ADHD and neurodiverse individuals. If you'd like to find out more, you can visit them. The show links are in the notes below, and I would encourage you to go along and have a look and educate yourself on their fight. It's an incredibly important cause, and we're super proud to have them as charity partners for the MarketPulse Pros and Pioneers podcast. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your episode.
And I think that's the same in so many aspects of life as well, not just in executive coaching and business, but in so many different things. So appreciate you sharing that. In terms of the story so far, so then you've kind of wound down the family business. Was that the starting point for you then looking to become an executive coach to kind of help people avoid the same sort of problems, or?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes you choose your path and sometimes the path can be for you a little bit. So I'd say it's a beautiful blend of both, and, the company actually continued on, and it's a long story that I don't want to, bore anybody with, but, the company that my family founded recently, like a year and a half ago, just transacted for $60 million. And it is virtually in the same business as it was, when we left it. So it went through bankruptcy, got bought by some private equity guys, and they just took that platform and then grew it and, they recapitalized it and have done very well with it. So all the employees were, basically whole and complete. It was just the family that lost ownership of the business. So I got into this thing having, again, hired my first coach in 1999. When that event occurred in 2009, it was like, I have a set of skills and I just had this experience. And I have to imagine there's other business owners who are confronting similar circumstances. So, why don't I begin to go out in the world and try to find clients who are challenged with some of the same things and see if I could be of help to them. That's where it began. So it was, when I got to the end of that whole process and I didn't have my role as a CEO in the business and found myself, unemployed and wondering what to do, I said, well, why don't I do what I know how to do? That's what began my journey down this path. And I'd say, what I've experienced as a result of it is that when I was the CEO of my family's business, and I've been the CEO of a couple of other companies as well, you have the impact on the organization and the people and the customers and the vendors that are in that orbit, right? As a coach, consultant, advisor, the impact is exponential. So just yesterday, I ended up working with two people who have a combined footprint of, maybe 1,000 employees in two different businesses. And I wake up this morning and after we're done with this call and this podcast, I'll go on and I'll work with a couple more people today of, again, a significant and broad impact on a community of employees and go on from there. So I love the exponential impact that I can have now, a coach, a consultant, an advisor, as opposed to, the limited impact I could have in my other roles within a singular organization, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. I wonder, so a lot of the executive coaches and leadership coaches that are out there come from the traditional route is from HR, right? Or a psychology background. And I understand why that is, but you're coming from a place of having built business yourself and from real world experience. How do you feel that helps you be unique in the space that you're in? I'd say marketplace. It's not a marketplace really. It's a community, right?
Yeah. Well, I think first and foremost, and I'm going to use a metaphor here, that if I had a drug or alcohol addiction, chances are that if I'm working to find a way out of that addiction, the best place for me to go is to speak to a recovered addict, right? Somebody who lived the life that I lived, faced the challenges that I had faced, and has found their way out of, all of those challenges, through the guidance of somebody who's walked that path. So I feel similar in the sense that if I were out in the marketplace as a CEO and I'm running a business or an entrepreneur, it would be helpful for me to have somebody who's walked the path that I walked and face the challenges that I'm facing. And so I think that's a piece that I say to people all the time. I don't think there's a challenge you're going to tell me that I haven't faced personally, or that I haven't worked with somebody as a client who hasn't faced that same challenge. And in organizations, as an entrepreneur CEO, it's a very unique role. Every other role in the business, you have individual consciousness, which is me as, a person working in the business. You have team consciousness, which is maybe it's a functional area, like a CFO who has responsibility for finance. But the one person who lives constantly and never endingly in organizational consciousness is the entrepreneur or CEO. And it's an all consuming 24-hour day, 7-day a week, 365, it's that level. It almost is like the business never leaves you. Even when you're not in it, it's in you. And so that's a very unique set of circumstances. And unless you've lived that and have a deep understanding, I think it's harder to be of service completely and be of help completely to somebody who's going through that. So that's how I approach it. Like, I do it and I say all the time, I am sure I've made every mistake you could possibly imagine that you're thinking about making. And perhaps my experience of having already made that mistake could help you avoid it. Right. So a lot of hubris. I do not pretend like I have the answers. I own the truth. I just have the experience I have and have been witness to the experience of many others. And hopefully from all that gathered wisdom, I can be of help to you.
Well, that's also the premise of being a CEO, right? It's like you don't need to have all the answers. You just need to know enough about the people around you to get the right answers from other people. Or as one of my good friends said, it's not about having the right answers, it's about asking the right questions. And I think that's a beautiful way to sum up the role of the CEO. It's almost like internal coaching, but you just don't realize that's what the job is. And then kind of bringing us up to modern day, you've co-founded a Mexican grill in Dublin. I love that's spun off from what you were doing. How did that come about? Because you've got a co-founder out in Dublin as well, right?
I do. Yeah. Tony is his name. And it's a long story. I'll try to make it as short as possible, but I have been a youth coach. I have 4 kids for 24 years. And I met Tony about 24 years ago when his oldest son and my oldest son, like 4 or 5 years old, starting to play soccer. And I met him on the sideline. He was one of the parents who brought his son to the team that I was coaching. And then we hit it off and, have kind of remained dear friends, and his whole family. I've coached both of his sons, both in soccer and rugby. I've been an active, youth rugby coach for about 20 years. And I played for a number of years and refereed, et cetera. So love the sport. And so I met Tony in that world, and he and I share a passion for a business in Colorado in the United States called Chipotle. You may have heard about it. It's an extraordinarily successful chain of fast casual Mexican grills. Tony wanted to take this idea of Mexican food back to Ireland. So he did. He went through one iteration, exited the first iteration of that back in 2017. He and I got, back together. And as he approached his second, we talked about partnering. And so he and I have been locked at the hip, and we have a phenomenal team of people who allowed us to, realize that dream. We have 2 stores currently open, 2 opening in the next, say, month to 2 months. And our intent is to, grow it back to a chain of about 20-ish stores in Ireland, and then come across the pond and, try our hand in the UK as well. So that's our goal. I mean, who doesn't love good food? And, this food is phenomenal. It's just really tasty. So that's how I got into it.
I have to say, I've got the web page open, and I'm starving as we're recording this. So the food looks absolutely, I'm wishing I was in Dublin, because I think I'd be banging on the business door. So that's phenomenal. Yeah. Coming back again, I guess, to the executive coaching side of things, AI, remote work, automation, there are so many nuances to running business in 2025. What do you see as being the single greatest gift and threat to a CEO in the current age?
Yeah. I say this often to the clients that I'm grateful that I had my, hand on the wheel of running companies when this was not a thing, because there's so many variables that are moving at a speed that's almost hard to wrap your head around. The first thing I, would advise a client is, avoiding doesn't work, right? As a principle, and hope is not a good strategy. So, those are a couple of things just as principles in the background, because it's evident that AI is here and it's coming and it will have a tremendous impact virtually everything that we do. And a lot of my podcast consumption is around this particular topic. So there's no avoiding it. There's no pretending it's going to go away or it's going to go back and the genie's going to go back in the bottle. So if all that's true, then you really have to wake up and get engaged, right? If you're not waking up and getting engaged with all of those moving parts, you'll be obsolete, I think, quickly. And I think that runs across the gamut. So I mean, as an individual, guy who has a small little business with a few people that are involved from a marketing and administrative perspective, I use AI all day long, and it is a remarkably effective tool. So you got to embrace it. You got to see it. You can't put your head in the sand and pretend it's going to go away. So identifying, naming, and then figuring out with a team of people, if you have a team, what is your strategy going to be to incorporate AI as a thing? When it comes to the remote work environment challenges, I think every organization is finding their way through this, massive change in even how we define work and what work is. And so, I have clients that have a mandatory 5 days in, some who have, 1 day in, 4 days out, some who have 3 in and 2. I mean, you've seen it, there's no one way to do anything. I'd really encourage a business owner to find the way that creates a healthy blend between what they need as a CEO and owner and what the employees are, basically advocating for, to create a balance that works for everybody. And that's not an easy thing to solve. So I think we have some significant challenges, and we're just at the front end of really both of those trends. So it's a lot to bear. And,
more to come.
Absolutely. And if you throw just the human nature to allow ourselves to be distracted with social media, walking through a business, if people are in the business or working remotely, the devices that we, are so attached to are a never ending knock on your door. Do you have a minute? Do you have a minute to watch this video? Do you have a minute? And it's just like, oh my goodness. I don't begin to imagine what the impact on, I'll use the word productivity is, but focus and attention and deep work have got to be a challenge that's never been felt like this before. So you put all that together, it's a big soup.
And if you're watching this as a clip at home, yes, you.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So yeah, I love that. Mark, who are your ideal clients to work with? And based on the conversation at the dinner table, what are they saying to their family or their partners at home that makes them, it's the trigger point that they should be speaking with somebody like yourself, would you say?
Yeah, that's a great question. I appreciate the question. The people that I love working with and are a great fit for me are people who, like I said, are CEOs, owners of a business. Occasionally strays into that category of, senior leaders who run a really big organization within a big company and who have a sense of self-awareness. Like I've done everything I can do. And in spite of all my best efforts and everything I've brought to bear to help me and the business solve whatever the challenge it is that I'm confronting, I'm out of solutions, I'm out of ideas, and I need some help. Right. And I think that's the point where the self-awareness component of it is what I really look for. People who are open and willing to know that they don't have to know and may not ever know all the answers. And by reaching out and inviting somebody else in to partner with them, that can accelerate sort of the breakthrough that gets them past whatever it is they're being, challenged with. And usually at home around the kitchen table, it's, I don't know what to do, and I've tried everything. I'm stuck. I know that there's so much more potential, and we're not living into the potential. Just had two, guys yesterday in a conversation. It's a father and son, family owned business. In that, they've been stuck at a level of revenue and they're very frustrated. They've been there for a while and they just don't know how to get unstuck. And so if you go to my website, you'll see you don't get stuck you don't drown by falling in the river. You drown by staying in it, right? That's a quote that's right there. It's this idea of, you need to
I love that.
Get yourself out of there. So anyway, that's what I would say would be the ideal client. It's, it doesn't matter the industry. I've worked across virtually every industry that you could categorize. It's just the role and that sense.
Love it. Mark, thank you very much for being a fantastic guest for us today on the show.
Thank you so much, Paul. It's been a pleasure. Really enjoyed being here.
And once again, thank you everyone at home for coming along and joining us. Thank you to our charity partners, ADHD Liberty, and I will see you again next week for another episode. Thanks for joining us for today's show. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to feature on a future show, or you've got some ideas for folks who would make a great guest, please drop us a line. Contact details are in the show notes and I'd love to hear from you. Your host today was me, Paul Banks, founder at Javelin Content Management. Here at Javelin, we specialise in helping busy business owners just like you to repurpose video content, taking all the stress and tech problems away and turning your long-form video into literally hundreds of pieces of content without breaking the bank. We describe it as getting ideas out of your head into video and out to your socials. If you want to launch your personal brand, become the vendor of choice for your audience, or maximise your sales revenue impact, we'd love to hear from you. Join us next Wednesday for the next episode, and don't forget to subscribe and give us a review. Our podcast is only possible with your continued support.